The little girl had been running from every governess for 6 months. She hid under beds, bit one woman on the hand, and screamed until 3 separate candidates packed their bags and left before breakfast. But on a gray Tuesday morning in November, something changed. The new governess stepped through the front door, and little Lily, wild, untamable Lily, went completely still. She walked across the entrance hall slowly, as if in a dream, pressed her face into the woman's coat and breathed in once, twice. Then she said 4 words so quietly that only the Duke, standing frozen at the top of the stairs, could hear them. "You smell like Mama." He gripped the banister. His knuckles went white, because his wife had been dead for 2 years. And this woman, this stranger standing in his hallway with a worn leather bag and tired eyes, had never once met her. He told himself it meant nothing. He was wrong. The letter had said the position was straightforward. 1 child, 1 estate, 40 miles north of London, where the countryside flattened into gray fields and the wind came down from the hills without apology. The salary was modest but fair, the letter said, and the child, Lady Lily Ashford, age 5, was spirited but intelligent. Eleanor had learned, over the course of her 26 years, that spirited was the word people used when they meant something else entirely. Still, she had taken the position. She had taken it because there were no other positions left, and because the alternative, returning to her aunt's house in Bath with nothing but her pride and an empty purse, was not something she was willing to do. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The carriage ride had taken most of the day. By the time Ashford Park came into view, the light was already failing, and the house rose out of the mist like something that had always been there and always would be: gray stone, tall windows, a silence around it that felt less like peace and more like breath being held. Eleanor straightened her back and told herself she was not intimidated. She was, of course, deeply. But she had learned long ago that posture could lie on behalf of the person wearing it. The housekeeper, Mrs. Howell, met her at the door, a woman of around 60, with sharp eyes behind a kind face, the sort of woman who had seen everything and judged most of it, and kept her opinions filed neatly behind her teeth. "Miss Ashworth," she said, "you're later than expected. The roads were soft from the rain." "I apologize, Mrs." Howell studied her for a moment, not unkindly but thoroughly, then stepped aside. "Come in, then. I'll show you your room, and then we'll see about supper. His Grace is not dining with the household this evening." His Grace, the Duke of Ashford. Eleanor had read what she could find about him before accepting the position. James Ashford, the 6th Duke. 34 years old. Decorated in the Northern campaigns. Widowed 2 years prior, under circumstances the newspapers had described as tragic without ever quite explaining what that meant. He had gone through 4 governesses since his wife's death. The agency had told Eleanor this as though it were ordinary. Eleanor had decided privately that it was not ordinary at all. She followed Mrs. Howell up the stairs, taking in the house as she went. It was grand, undeniably, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, portraits lining the walls with the particular severity of people who had never once in their lives been asked to smile. But there was something underneath the grandeur that Eleanor noticed immediately and could not quite name. It felt unlived in. Not empty, the fires were burning, the floors were clean, the flowers on the hall table were fresh. But there was a quality to the air, a kind of suspension, as though the house itself were waiting for something to change and had been waiting for quite some time. Mrs. Howell opened the door to her room, small but adequate, a narrow bed, a washstand, a window looking out over the back garden, mostly lost to the dark. The schoolroom is at the end of the east corridor, Mrs. Howell said. You'll meet Lady Lily in the morning. She takes breakfast at 8. She paused. I'll be honest with you, Miss Ashworth, because I think you have the look of a woman who prefers it. I do, Eleanor said. The child is not easy. Not because she's bad, she isn't. She's a good girl with a great deal of pain, and no sensible way to put it anywhere. The last governess lasted 11 days. The one before that 4, Mrs. Howell folded her hands. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but because the ones who left, they left feeling defeated. I'd rather you go in prepared. Eleanor set her bag down on the bed. What does she do? Hides. Screams. Refuses to speak for entire days. And once Mrs. Howell allowed herself a very small, very controlled smile. She put a frog in Miss Pemberton's tea. Eleanor considered this. Was it a large frog, remarkably large, and Miss Pemberton, left before noon, a pause. I liked Miss Pemberton least of all, if I'm being truthful. Eleanor almost smiled. She didn't quite. But it was close. She did not sleep well that night. The house made noises in the dark, the settling of old walls, the wind finding its way through gaps that hadn't been sealed, the distant sound of an owl somewhere in the grounds. Eleanor lay in the narrow bed, looked at the ceiling and thought, as she often did when she was somewhere new and uncertain, of her mother. Her mother had died when Eleanor was 9, a fever, swift and unargued with. Her father had followed 3 years later, leaving behind debts that surprised everyone, including, Eleanor suspected, himself. She had been passed between relatives after that, first an uncle in Edinburgh who meant well and achieved little, then her aunt in Bath, who meant less but was at least honest about it. She had made herself useful wherever she was. She had been told from an early age that this was what a woman in her position did. You make yourself useful. You take up as little space as possible. You are grateful for what is offered, and you do not ask for more. Eleanor had followed this advice for 26 years. She was beginning, quietly and without telling anyone, to resent it. She found the schoolroom the next morning by following the sound, not screaming. She had prepared for screaming, but something else, a kind of low, tuneless humming accompanied by what sounded like furniture being rearranged with great determination and no particular plan. Eleanor opened the door. The schoolroom was in chaos. 2 chairs were on their sides. A basket of wooden letters had been appended across the floor, and in the center of the room, standing on top of a small table with her arms out for balance, was a child with dark curly hair and her father's serious eyes, humming to herself as though this were entirely normal. Lily looked up when Eleanor came in. They regarded each other. You're the new one, the child said. I am, Eleanor agreed. And you must be Lady Lily. I bit the last one, so I heard. Lily seemed to be evaluating whether this response was satisfactory. She had the look of a child accustomed to adults becoming either immediately nervous or immediately stern around her, and was not sure what to do with someone who appeared to be neither. Are you frightened of me? She asked. Eleanor looked at the overturned chairs, the scattered letters, the small watchful girl standing on the table in her stocking feet. Not especially, she said. Are you coming down from there? A long pause. Maybe, said Lily. She came down eventually, not because Eleanor asked her a second time, she didn't, but because Eleanor sat down on the floor among the scattered wooden letters and began quietly sorting them into piles without comment, and after approximately 4 minutes, curiosity won. Lily climbed down from the table and came to sit across from her, watching Eleanor's hands. What are you doing? Sorting. This pile is vowels. This pile is consonants. What's a vowel? A letter that your mouth stays open for. Like this aya, Lily's mouth opened. Ah, yeah, she said experimentally. Exactly. They sat together on the floor for the better part of an hour. Alina did not attempt a lesson, did not produce a textbook or sit Lily at the desk, or speak in the particular bright, effortful voice that Alina had observed other governesses use. The voice that said, "I am trying very hard to seem as though this is fun." She simply sorted letters and occasionally said their names, and let Lily decide what to do with that. By the end of it, Lily had built a wall out of the consonants and was using the vowels as ammunition against an imaginary enemy force. Alina decided this was probably fine. She was in the corridor afterward, making her way back toward the stairs, when she became aware that she was not alone. She turned. The Duke was standing perhaps 10 feet away at the far end of the corridor, taller than she had imagined from the descriptions, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had once been younger and easier, and had since been weathered into something more complicated. He wore no jacket, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like a man who had been doing something and stopped midway through, because he had seen something he did not expect. He was looking at her, not with interest or not only with interest. There was something else in his expression, something tight and guarded and almost frightened. "Your Grace," Alina said, because someone had to say something. He did not answer immediately. His eyes moved over her face with the slow, careful attention of someone trying to solve a problem they haven't named yet. "You are Miss Ashworth," he said finally. It was not a question. "I am. How was she this morning? She put the vowels to military use," Alina said. But she listened. "She's curious, that's something to work with." Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one remembered. "She is," he said. "She always has been." He looked at Alina for one moment longer than was entirely comfortable, then turned and walked away down the corridor without another word. Alina stood watching him go, trying to understand why the look on his face, just for that brief moment, had seemed less like a duke assessing a new employee and more like a man who had seen something impossible. She found the portrait that night. She hadn't meant to go looking. She simply couldn't sleep. The room felt small, and she had taken a candle and walked quietly through the corridor, telling herself she was only stretching her legs. The door at the end of the east wing was slightly open. She pushed it gently. A sitting room, unused dust covers on the furniture, a cold fireplace, and on the wall above the mantelpiece, a large portrait in an ornate frame covered with a heavy cloth that had been there long enough to collect dust along the top. Alina stood in front of it for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she reached up and lifted the edge of the cloth. The candlelight moved across the painted face beneath. Alina's breath stopped. The woman in the portrait was not her. The features were different if you looked closely. The nose, the shape of the jaw, the particular way the mouth was set. They were not the same person. But in the warm, uncertain light of the candle, with the silence of the house around her and her own pulse loud in her ears, they could have been sisters. Alina stood there for a long time. The candle burned. The house was quiet. "Who are you?" she thought, looking at the painted face. And for reasons she could not explain, she felt very deeply that the answer mattered. The next morning, Alina said nothing about what she had found. This was a deliberate choice. She had stood in that cold sitting room long enough to understand that the portrait was not something the household talked about: the dust cover, the closed door, the unused room at the end of a wing where no one apparently went. These were not accidents. These were decisions. And Alina had learned, in 26 years of living in other people's houses, that the decisions a household made about what to cover up were almost always more important than anything left in plain sight. So she came down to breakfast, ate what was brought to her, smiled at Mrs. Howell and asked about the day's schedule and did not mention the portrait at all. But she thought about it, quietly, steadily, the way a stone sits at the bottom of a river, still but not gone. Lily was already in the schoolroom when Alina arrived. This was progress. Yesterday it had taken Alina 20 minutes to locate her. She had been discovered behind the window seat, reading a book about birds upside down with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what they were doing and was not interested in discussing it. Today she was sitting at the desk correctly, with her hands folded. The effort this had cost her was visible in every line of her small body. Alina set her things down and did not make a fuss of it. "Good morning, Lily. Good morning, Miss Ashworth." Very formal. Very careful. "Shall we start with letters today?" "Real ones, not ammunition." Lily's mouth twitched. "I suppose." They worked for an hour. Lily was, as Alina had suspected, considerably cleverer than the chaos of the day before had suggested. She grasped things quickly, sometimes so quickly that she was already 3 steps ahead and visibly impatient with the pace. She drummed her fingers, looked at the window, and brought herself back with the particular effort of a child who has been told many times to sit still and has decided to try, even though every part of her finds it unreasonable. Alina recognized this. She had been that child once. "You can stand if you need to," she said, in the middle of a spelling exercise. Lily looked at her. Miss Pemberton said sitting still was. "Miss Pemberton is gone," Alina said simply. "Walk around the desk if it helps you think." "I don't mind." Lily stood up immediately, walked 3 circles around the desk spelling WINDOW out loud as she went, and got every letter right. Alina wrote something in her notebook and said nothing. But she filed it away. This child thought with her body, not against it. That was useful to know. It was after the lesson, when Lily was eating the apple misses. Howell had brought up that it happened. She had been watching Alina tidy the books the way children do, openly, without self-consciousness, with the full weight of their attention. "Your hair is different from Mama's," she said. Alina stilled. Kept her hands moving, but stilled inside. "Is it? Mama's was darker. And she wore it up all the time, even at home." A pause. "Papa used to pull the pins out when he thought no one was watching." Lily said this without sadness, with the particular matter-of-factness of a child describing the world as it was, before it changed. She laughed when he did it. Alina turned around slowly. Lily was looking at her apple. "She sounds lovely," Alina said carefully. She was. Lily took a bite and chewed. "You smell like her though," she added, as though this were simply an observation about the weather. "Not exactly." "But close." She looked up. "It makes me feel better." "Is that strange?" Alina found, to her considerable surprise, that her throat had tightened. "No," she said. "I don't think that's strange at all." She learned the Duchess's name that afternoon not from Lily, and not from Mrs. Howell, who had the practiced discretion of a woman who knew which subjects were navigated around in this house, rather than through. She learned it from the small brass plate at the bottom of the portrait frame. She had gone back. She had told herself she wouldn't, and then she had gone back anyway, in the early afternoon when Lily was resting and the house was quiet. She had lifted the dust cover all the way this time and held her candle close. Margaret Ashford, Duchess of Ashford. 1831, 1857. 26 years old when she died. Alina's age exactly. She stood with that knowledge for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she heard the footstep behind her. She turned. The Duke was standing in the doorway, still, the way he had been still in the corridor the day before, with that particular quality of a man who has been caught off guard and is refusing to show it. His eyes went from Eleanor's face to the portrait and back again. The silence lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. "I apologize," Eleanor said. "The door was open. I should not have. You're the fourth person to stand in that spot and look between the two of you." His voice was even quiet. "The other three were members of my staff who had the sense to pretend they hadn't noticed." Eleanor thought about pretending. Decided against it. "She was your wife," she said. "She was. I can see why the resemblance would be unsettling." "If you would prefer what I would prefer," he said, with a precision that suggested he had thought about this already, possibly at length, possibly at considerable personal cost, "is for this conversation not to be happening at all." He looked at her steadily. "You are here to teach my daughter, Miss Ashworth. That is the beginning and the end of your role in this house. I would appreciate it if we could proceed on that basis. Of course, Your Grace." "Good." He turned to leave, stopped, turned back because apparently he couldn't help it. "Cover it when you leave." "Yes," Eleanor said. He left. Eleanor turned back to the portrait. Margaret Ashford looked back at her, serene in the way that painted people always were, unbothered by the living world and all its complications. "Who were you?" Eleanor thought for the second time. "And why does looking at you feel like looking at something I've lost, rather than something I never had?" She covered the portrait carefully when she left. Lady Blackwell arrived that evening. Eleanor knew who she was before anyone told her. She had the Duke's coloring, his height, and his particular talent for filling a room with presence without appearing to try. She swept through the front door as though the house were still hers, which Eleanor gathered from Mrs. Howell's expression it had once technically been. The Duke's mother, widowed 15 years prior, dividing her time between London and the estate of a cousin in Wiltshire. Currently visiting Mrs. Howell said, because she had heard the new governess had arrived and wished to Mrs. Howell's pause here was very precise, satisfy herself that the arrangements were suitable. Eleanor met her in the drawing room before dinner. Lady Blackwell stood by the window, and when Eleanor entered she turned. And stopped only for a moment, a single beat of stillness, quickly recovered, smoothly covered. A woman of Lady Blackwell's composure did not lose it easily, and she did not lose it now. But Eleanor saw it. The instant of shock. The color that moved in, and then out of her face like a tide. Then it was gone, and Lady Blackwell was simply a handsome, composed woman in an expensive gray dress, looking at Eleanor with polite, cool attention. "Miss Ashworth," she said. "Lady Blackwell." "It's an honor. Sit down." Eleanor sat. Lady Blackwell did not. The questions came steadily. Where Eleanor had trained, how many previous positions, who were her references, did she have experience with children who had experienced loss? All perfectly reasonable, all delivered in the tone of someone conducting an interview they had already decided the outcome of. Eleanor answered each one carefully and told the truth, because lying was more work than it was worth, and she had never been very good at it besides. At the end of it, Lady Blackwell looked at her for a long moment. "You are younger than I expected," she said. "I am 26, my lady." Something moved across Lady Blackwell's face. "There and gone." "Yes," she said. "I see that." She ended the interview shortly afterward, not rudely but with finality, and Eleanor returned to her room with the distinct and unverifiable impression that she had just been assessed for something that had nothing to do with her qualifications as a governess. She was nearly asleep when she heard them, voices below her window. The Duke's, she recognized the low, even cadence of it, and his mother's quicker, more urgent. Eleanor did not go to the window. She was not the kind of woman who listened at windows. But the house was old and the walls were not thick, and some words came up through the glass, whether she wanted them to or not. She caught only fragments. His mother's voice, "You cannot keep her here, James, you must see that." And his quieter, harder to catch, "My decision, not yours." And then something she almost missed, half swallowed by the wind, "You don't know what she is." Then silence. Alina lay in the dark with her eyes open, and her thoughts moving carefully around the edges of something she couldn't yet see the shape of. Not who. What? She stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. Sleep, when it finally came, was not restful. The frost came overnight. Alina discovered this when she rose before dawn, as she always did, and found the window glass traced with white patterns, delicate, precise, indifferent to everything happening inside the house. She pressed one finger to the cold pane and watched a small circle of clarity open up, and through it she could see the garden below, silver gray in the early light, perfectly still. She had slept badly. She had expected to. "You don't know what she is." She had turned the words over through the night like a coin she couldn't identify, feeling the edges, testing the weight, unable to determine the value. Lady Blackwell had not been speaking carelessly. There had been urgency in those fragments of voice, the particular urgency of someone saying something they had been holding back and could no longer contain. Alina dressed, pinned her hair, and told herself firmly, and without a great deal of conviction, that it was none of her business. Then she went downstairs to begin the day. Lily was in a different mood that morning. Not difficult, not the overturned chairs and wooden ammunition of 2 days ago, but something quieter than that, and in its own way harder to navigate. She sat at the desk and did what was asked of her, but there was a distance behind her eyes, a place she had gone to that Alina couldn't follow. Alina let her be, mostly, keeping the lesson gentle, reading aloud, a little arithmetic, nothing that required Lily to be fully present if she wasn't able to manage it. Children had days like this. So did adults, if they were honest. It was halfway through the morning that Lily spoke. "Grandmother was here last night," she said, not looking up from her book. "I know," Alina said. "I met her yesterday evening. She doesn't like it when things change." Lily turned a page she hadn't finished reading. "When Papa hired the first governess after Mama died, Grandmother cried. Not in front of anyone. But I heard her." A pause. "I hear a lot of things." Alina looked at the child, really looked at her. 5 years old, with her father's serious eyes and her mother's dark hair, sitting very straight in a chair that was slightly too large for her, telling Alina something important in the careful way of someone who had learned that direct statements made adults uncomfortable. "You're very observant," Alina said. "Papa says that too." Lily finally looked up. "He says it like it's a good thing. Grandmother says it like it isn't. What do you think?" Lily considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I think it's just true," she said. "Like having brown eyes. It isn't good or bad. It's just what I am." Alina felt something shift in her chest, quiet and warm like a coal catching. "I think so too," she said. She did not intend to go to the library. The morning lesson ended, Lily went with Mrs. Howell for her midday meal, and Alina had an hour to herself. Today she found herself walking instead, following the corridors of Ashford Park with the slow, attentive pace of someone trying to understand a place by moving through it. The library was on the ground floor, south-facing, catching what thin November light there was. The door was unlocked. Alina pushed it open and stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room floor-to-ceiling shelves, a reading table in the center, 2 leather chairs by the cold fireplace. The smell of old paper and wood polish, and something faintly herbal she couldn't immediately identify. Lavender. She placed it after a moment. Someone had kept dried lavender in here once. The ghost of it still lived in the curtains. She went to the shelves, not looking for anything in particular, simply wanting books, the uncomplicated comfort of them, the way they asked nothing of you except attention. She ran her finger along the spine slowly, reading titles drifting. She had almost reached the far end of the second shelf when she saw them. They were not hidden exactly, simply set apart, a bundle of folded papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, pushed to the back of the shelf behind a row of botanical volumes where they would not be immediately visible unless you were standing at precisely the right angle. Which Elinor was. She should not have looked at them. She knew this. She looked at them. She lifted the bundle carefully and turned it in her hands. The ribbon was old, the knot soft with age. The papers were folded in thirds the way letters were folded, and the outside of the topmost one showed the ghost of an address in faded ink, almost unreadable, but not quite. Elinor did not untie the ribbon. She was clear about this afterward in her own accounting of events. She did not open the letters, did not read them, did not cross that particular line. But she looked at the handwriting on the outside. She couldn't help it. And what she saw made her stand very still for a long moment with the bundle in her hands, and something cold, moving slowly up the back of her neck. The handwriting was familiar. Not because she had seen it before, she hadn't. She was almost certain she hadn't. But it was familiar the way a melody is familiar when you can't place where you heard it. The way a face in a crowd sometimes stops you for reasons you can't explain. There was something in the shape of the letters, the particular way the capital A was formed, the slight leftward lean of the whole. It looked like her own handwriting. Not identical, not a copy, but close enough that she felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet. That's impossible, she told herself. Handwriting is not inherited. It is learned. It is coincidence. She set the letters back carefully, exactly as she had found them, and stepped away from the shelf. She was across the room and nearly at the door when she heard his voice. Miss Ashworth, she turned. The Duke was standing inside the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in, which she found unsettling, because she was usually good at hearing people come in. He was looking at her with that expression she was beginning to recognize, the careful, guarded look of a man who felt more than he intended to show, and was in a constant state of managing the difference. His eyes moved to the shelf where the letters were, then back to her face. "I came to find a volume on estate management," Elinor said, "because silence would have been worse. I apologize for disturbing your library. You're not disturbing it." He moved into the room, to the reading table, setting down some papers he'd been carrying. "You're welcome to use it. I should have said so when you arrived." A pause, brief and loaded. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Elinor met his eyes. "No," she said, which was true in its way. He nodded, as though this were the answer he'd expected. Or hoped for. She couldn't tell which. She left the library with her hands steady, and her thoughts anything but. The afternoon lesson went better. Lily emerged from her morning quiet in the way that children sometimes do, suddenly, completely, without explanation, and by 2 o'clock she was fully present, asking questions faster than Elinor could answer them, pulling books off the shelf and demanding to know what they were about and whether she could read them, and why the words were so long, and who had decided that encyclopedia needed to be spelled that way. Elinor answered each question as seriously as it deserved. By 3 o'clock they were on the floor again, Lily's preferred learning position. Elinor had concluded, with a large illustrated atlas open between them, Lily pressing her finger to various countries and demanding facts. "France," she said. "They have a great deal of excellent cheese and a complicated relationship with their kings." Lily looked up. "What does complicated mean?" It means they couldn't quite decide whether they wanted them or not. Did they decide? Several times. In different directions, Lily seemed to find this satisfying. She moved her finger. Here, that's the ocean. What's on the other side? America. Is it nice there? Parts of it, I'm told. It's very large, which means it contains quite a lot of everything. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Then she looked up at Eleanor with that clear, undeflectable gaze. "Miss Ashworth," she said, "were you ever somebody's mama?" Eleanor felt the question land somewhere quiet and tender. "No," she said. "I haven't been. But you know how," Lily said, not a question, simply a fact about the world, stated as plainly as everything else, requiring no particular response. Eleanor looked at the child for a moment, at the atlas, at the late afternoon light falling across the floor between them. "I don't know about that," she said softly. "I do," said Lily, and moved her finger to a new country. Eleanor found her that evening at the end of the East Corridor. Not Lily. Lady Blackwell. She was waiting, there was no other word for it, standing with her hands folded and her back straight, and the particular stillness of a woman who had decided on a course of action and was not going to be dissuaded. The corridor was dim, the nearest lamp several feet away, throwing Lady Blackwell's face into a half-light that made her expression harder to read than it might otherwise have been. Eleanor stopped when she saw her. "Lady Blackwell, Miss Ashworth," a pause. "Walk with me." It was not a request. Eleanor walked with her. They went toward the end of the corridor, away from the main stairs, toward the shuttered rooms of the East Wing. Lady Blackwell moved at a measured pace, looking straight ahead, saying nothing for long enough that Eleanor began to wonder whether she had misjudged the nature of this encounter entirely. Then Lady Blackwell said, quietly and without preface, "I know who you are." Eleanor kept walking, kept her breathing even. "I'm not sure what you mean. I think you are." Lady Blackwell stopped and turned. In the half-light, her face was composed, controlled, and underneath both of those things frightened. "I mean that your being in this house is not a coincidence. Or if it is a coincidence, it is the kind that cannot be allowed to continue. Lady Blackwell, I was hired through an agency in London. I have never been to Ashford Park before in my life. I am not questioning how you arrived." A pause, her voice dropping. "I am telling you that you must leave. Tonight if possible. Tomorrow morning at the latest." Eleanor stared at her. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I am asking you to." Lady Blackwell's composure flickered, just slightly, just for a moment. "I cannot explain further. You will have to trust that I am telling you this for reasons that matter." "To whom?" Eleanor said. "To you. Or to Lily." Something crossed Lady Blackwell's face, pain, perhaps, or something that had once been pain and had hardened into determination over years of pressure. "Leave Miss Ashworth," she said quietly. "While it is still simple." She walked away down the corridor and did not look back. Eleanor stood in the half-dark with her heart beating fast and her mind moving through everything. The portrait, the letters, the handwriting, the words through the window glass the night before. And now this, all of it circling something she couldn't yet see the center of but could feel, the way you feel a fire in the next room before you open the door. "I know who you are." But Eleanor didn't. And that, she realized, standing alone in the corridor of a house that held secrets like water holds cold, that was the thing she could not walk away from. She went to her room that night and opened her traveling case. At the bottom, beneath her spare dress and her 2 good books, and the letter from her friend in Bath she had read so many times the fold lines were wearing through, she found what she was looking for. A small drawstring pouch, soft with age. Inside it a single object, a medallion oval, the size of a large coin, silver or something that had once been silver, now worn to a warm gray. On one side, an engraving she had traced so many times she could reproduce it blindfolded. A small bird, wings open, mid-flight. Her mother had pressed it into her hand the week before she died. "Keep this," she had said. "Don't ask me where it came from. Just keep it." Alina had kept it for 17 years. She had never known where it came from. She had asked once, when she was old enough to frame the question properly, and her aunt had gone very still and said she didn't know, which Alina had not believed at the time and believed even less now. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the medallion in her palm and thought about Lady Blackwell's face in the half-light. Leave. While it is still simple. The implication being, of course, that it would not always be simple, that the longer Alina stayed, the more complicated the leaving would become. She turned the medallion over and traced the bird with her thumb. She had come to this house for £40 a year and a room of her own. She had not come for any of this. And yet, she thought of Lily on the floor with the atlas, pressing her finger to the ocean. "You know how," she had said, with the certainty of someone who had simply observed a true thing and stated it. Alina put the medallion back in the pouch, put the pouch back in the case, and did not pack her things. She got into bed, pulled the blankets up and lay in the dark, and made the decision so quietly that she barely heard herself make it. She was not leaving. Not yet. Not without understanding. Not when every strange and inexplicable thing about this house was pointing towards something, and that something felt, in a way she could not rationally defend, like it belonged to her. The fever came on fast, the way fevers do with small children, without warning, without negotiation, without any of the preliminary signs that might have given Alina time to prepare. One moment Lily was at the dinner table, pushing her food around her plate with the absent focus of a child whose mind was elsewhere. The next she was listing sideways in her chair, and Alina was across the room before she had consciously decided to move, her hand on Lily's forehead, and the heat of it was immediate and alarming. "Mrs. Howell," she said, keeping her voice level. "I need you now, please." They got Lily upstairs and into bed. The child was half asleep already, flushed and heavy-eyed, her hair damp at the temples. Alina stripped the extra blankets, fever needed air, not weight, and sent the youngest housemaid for cool water and clean cloths and told her to be quick about it. "Mrs. Howell stood in the doorway. "I'll send for the doctor, yes. And tell him to hurry." Alina wrung out the first cloth and laid it across Lily's forehead. The child stirred, made a small unhappy sound, then stilled. "How far is he?" 8 miles. "In good weather 40 minutes, Mrs. Howell glanced at the window, at the dark pressing against the glass. "It isn't good weather." Alina absorbed this. "Then we manage until he arrives, Mrs. Howell looked at her, a long, measuring look. The kind Alina was beginning to understand meant the older woman was revising an opinion she'd already formed. Then she nodded once and went. The Duke came 20 minutes later. Alina heard him in the corridor first, quick, purposeful footsteps, not running but close to it. Then the door opened, and he was there, still in his evening clothes, his hair slightly disordered as though he had come directly from wherever he'd been without stopping. His eyes went immediately to Lily. "How bad?" he said. "High but not dangerous yet," Alina said. "She needs the fever brought down, and she needs to stay awake for another hour at least. The doctor is coming." He crossed the room and crouched beside the bed. He took Lily's small hand in both of his, and something moved across his face, something that had nothing to do with being a duke or being composed or managing what was visible. He was simply a father looking at his sick child, and the fear on his face was as plain and unguarded as Alina had ever seen on any human being. "Lily," he said softly. "I'm here." Lily's eyes opened, heavy-lidded. "Papa," her voice was thick with fever and sleep. "I'm here," he said again. "Miss Ashworth is here too," Lily said. "She put a cold thing on my head. I know." He glanced up at Alina briefly, something in his face she couldn't read. "That was sensible of her. It's wet," Lily observed. "It's supposed to be," Alina said. Lily considered this with the impaired gravity of a feverish 5-year-old. "All right," she decided, and closed her eyes again. The doctor did not arrive for 2 hours. The roads, as Mrs. Howell had predicted, were not cooperative. Alina did not waste time being frustrated about this. She did what needed doing, changed the cloths, kept Lily talking when she could, watched her breathing, watched her color, made the continuous small assessments that had no name but amounted to the steady knowledge of whether a child was worsening or holding steady. She was holding steady. Uncomfortable, unhappy, but holding. The Duke stayed. Alina had half expected him to pace the corridor, or to stand uselessly in the corner the way some people did in medical situations, afraid to help and afraid to leave. He did neither. He sat on the other side of Lily's bed, held her hand, and talked to her quietly, steadily, about nothing in particular. The horses. The names of the constellations, visible from the east window on clear nights. A story about a dog he'd had as a boy, an enormous disreputable animal called Admiral who had terrorized the cook and eaten an entire plum pudding one Christmas and shown no remorse whatsoever. Lily laughed at Admiral. Weakly but genuinely. Alina kept her eyes on her work and tried not to listen, and listened anyway. He was good at this, she hadn't expected that. Not that she had thought him cold, exactly, but there was a distance to him in ordinary circumstances, a careful management of space between himself and everything around him that she had assumed extended to all things. It didn't. Not here, not with Lily. Here he was simply present, in the uncomplicated way that mattered most. He loved his wife, Alina thought, watching him. He loves this child. He is a man who knows how to love people. He has simply run out of safe places to put it. She did not know where that thought came from. She filed it away without examining it. Around midnight, Lily's fever broke. It happened gradually, the heat easing, the color softening, the tense, unhappy lines of her small face smoothing out into genuine sleep. Alina checked her forehead, her pulse, her breathing. All of it moved in the right direction. She sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. Across the bed, the Duke did the same. Their eyes met briefly over Lily's sleeping form. Neither of them said anything because nothing needed saying. The relief was the same for both of them, wordless and complete. The doctor arrived shortly after, examined Lily efficiently, confirmed Alina's assessment with the slightly surprised air of a man who had expected to find things worse, left instructions and a tincture, and departed into the night. Mrs. Howell appeared to take the night watch. "Go and rest," she told Alina firmly. "Both of you. I'll call if anything changes." Alina stood. Her back ached, her eyes felt dry and heavy. She had been sitting in the same position for 2 hours and her body had noticed. She moved toward the door. The Duke moved at the same moment, and they arrived at the doorway at the same time, which was slightly too narrow for 2 people to pass through with any ease, and they both stopped. "After you," he said. "Thank you, Your Grace." She stepped through. He followed. They stood in the corridor, and Mrs. Howell pulled the door to behind them, and it was suddenly very quiet. He did not go immediately. Alina had expected him to, a brief good night, perhaps, the formal minimum, and then retreat to whatever part of the house he occupied in the evenings. Instead, he stood in the corridor with his hands in his pockets and his gaze on the middle distance, and said nothing for long enough that Alina began to wonder whether she should simply excuse herself and go. Then he said, "She's the only one I haven't failed." He said it quietly, evenly, in the tone of a man stating a fact he has had a long time to make peace with and hasn't quite managed it. Alina stood still. This was not a moment for the wrong word. "Margaret," he said. "My mother. Half the men I served with," he paused. "I have a particular talent for being in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Or the right place too late." His jaw tightened briefly. "Lily, I have managed, so far, not to fail. I am aware of how provisional that is. She's thriving," Alina said carefully. "Whatever you think of your record, she is a happy child who is loved. That isn't nothing. That's very far from nothing." He looked at her then, directly, in a way he usually didn't, as though he'd been carefully managing the angle of his attention and had momentarily forgotten too. "She is different since you came," he said. 3 days. She laughed at dinner last night. She hasn't laughed at dinner in," he stopped. "A long time." Alina didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that which wouldn't have felt like too much or too little. The silence sat between them differently from the silences they'd had before, less guarded, less like two people managing each other and more like two people simply occupying the same moment, too tired to maintain the usual architecture of distance. "How did she die?" Alina asked. She hadn't planned to. The question arrived fully formed, and she said it before she could decide whether it was wise. The Duke was quiet for a moment. She thought he might simply walk away. He didn't. "A carriage accident," he said. "On the London road." She had gone to visit her dressmaker, a perfectly ordinary morning. The coachman lost control on a wet corner. The carriage went into the ditch. He paused. She was gone by the time anyone reached her. "I'm sorry," Alina said. "The inquest lasted 3 days," he said, in the same even tone. "They called it an accident. Misadventure, the formal term was." The coachman testified. The road was examined. Everyone concluded that it was simply a thing that happened. On an ordinary morning. For no reason. Something in the way he said it made Alina look at him more carefully. "But you don't think so," she said slowly. He looked at her long enough that she felt it. "I think," he said carefully, "that there are questions I was told not to ask." And I was a pause, persuaded at the time that asking them would serve no one. That it would only extend a grief that was already very heavy. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. I was not in a good state at the time to resist persuasion. Alina thought of Lady Blackwell. Of "you don't know what she is." Of "leave while it is still simple." "Who persuaded you?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp at the end of the corridor threw a warm, uncertain light between them, and in it, his face was very still and his eyes were very dark, and he looked like a man standing at the edge of a question he had been circling for 2 years. "That," he said quietly, "is something I have been asking myself recently." He looked at her a moment longer, then said good night and walked away down the corridor. Alina stood watching him go with her heart beating unevenly and the medallion, upstairs in its pouch, feeling suddenly very heavy in her mind. She was almost at her room when she remembered she had left her shawl in Lily's bedroom. She went back quietly, eased the door open, slipped inside. Mrs. Howell was settled in the chair by the bed, knitting by candlelight, and glanced up and nodded. Lily slept soundly. Alina found her shawl on the chair beside the bed, picked it up, and as she turned to go, something caught her eye, something she had been too focused on Lily to notice earlier. On the small table beside the bed, arranged as though placed there deliberately, were Lily's few treasures. A smooth pebble from the garden. A drawing she had made of a horse that was mostly legs. A small cloth rabbit, worn soft with love. And around the rabbit's neck, tied with a piece of thread, a small oval medallion. Silver or something that had once been silver. A bird engraved on the front, wings open mid-flight. Identical to the one in Alina's room. Alina stood in the candlelight and stared at it and felt the world rearrange itself quietly around her, into a shape she didn't yet recognize but couldn't deny. Mrs. Howell looked up, saw Alina's face, looked at the medallion and looked back at Alina. That was her mother's, she said softly. The Duchess wore it every day. They found it in the carriage after the accident. Not a scratch on it, she paused. Funny thing to survive, isn't it? When so much else didn't, Alina could not speak. Go to bed, Miss Ashworth, Mrs. Howell said gently. You've done enough for one night. Alina went. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and took out her own medallion and held it in her palm and looked at it for a very long time. Same size. Same shape. Same bird, same wings, same mid-flight suspension. 2 medallions, one around a dead woman's rabbit, one in Alina's pocket, pressed there by a dying mother who said don't ask where it came from. Just keep it. Alina closed her fingers around it. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 2. She sat in the dark and held the medallion and understood, for the first time, that whatever she was standing at the edge of was not small. It was not a coincidence to be explained away, or a resemblance to be politely ignored. It was something that had been waiting, for a very long time, for someone to look at it directly. She was looking now. Alina did not sleep that night. She sat with the medallion until the candle burned down to nothing, and then she sat in the dark, and when the first gray light began to find its way through the curtain she was still sitting, still turning the same thoughts over, still arriving at the same place no matter which direction she approached from. 2 medallions. Identical. One around the neck of a dead woman's keepsake. One pressed into the hand of a 9-year-old girl, by a mother who was 3 days from dying and chose, in those 3 days, not to explain. Why? Why would a woman with 3 days left not explain? Either she couldn't because the explanation was too complicated, too dangerous, too long for the time remaining, or she wouldn't. Because knowing was more dangerous than not knowing. Alina had spent 17 years assuming the first. She was beginning to suspect the second. She was at breakfast before anyone else. She ate without tasting anything, drank her tea too fast, and by the time Mrs. Howell came down, Alina had already made 2 decisions. The first was that she was going to find out everything she could about Margaret Ashford, not from the household, not from the Duke, but from records. Parish records, birth registers, the kind of documents that didn't lie because they weren't written by people with reasons to. The second was that she was going to do this without telling anyone. She was not naive about the reasons for the second decision. Lady Blackwell knew something. The Duke was circling something he'd been told not to look at. And whoever had persuaded him to stop asking questions 2 years ago had done so for a reason, and that reason was still here, still operating, still. She thought of Lady Blackwell's face in the corridor, still frightened. Frightened people were dangerous. Alina had no intention of giving anyone advance warning. Lily was better by morning, not well, pale and quiet, moving carefully the way children do the day after a fever, as though they are not entirely sure their body has finished with them yet. But better. She ate her breakfast, asked for the atlas, and looked at Alina with the clear, uncomplicated trust of a child who has been looked after in the night and knows it. Eleanor kept the lesson very gentle, reading, a little drawing. Lily drew a picture of Admiral the dog, imagined from Eleanor's description, an enormous round-bodied creature with an expression of magnificent self-satisfaction. "He looks very pleased with himself," Eleanor said. "He ate a whole pudding," Lily said seriously. "He deserves to be." Eleanor smiled and kept smiling, and underneath the smile she was thinking about parish records and birth registers and a woman who had worn a medallion every day and died on an ordinary morning for no reason. She found what she needed in the village. It took 3 days. She went on the afternoons when Lily rested, telling Mrs. Howell she wanted air and exercise, which was true enough not to feel entirely like a lie. The village was 2 miles from the estate, small, cold, a church with a graveyard and a vestry and a vicar, who was elderly and slightly deaf and extremely willing to let an earnest young woman look through the parish records if she signed her name in the visitor's book, and admired the stained glass window, which she did. She went through the records methodically. She was looking for Margaret. Her maiden name had been Voss. This she had learned from Mrs. Howell in careful, casual conversation. Margaret Voss, born somewhere, christened somewhere, existing somewhere before she became a duchess. She found the christening record on the 3rd afternoon. Margaret Elaine Voss. Christened 14th March, 1831. Mother Catherine Voss. Father unknown. Eleanor stared at it. Father unknown. That was not unusual in itself. But it was the next entry that stopped her breath, because the records were kept chronologically, and the next christening in the register, dated 6 weeks later, was this: Eleanor Jane Ashworth. Christened 29th April 1831. Mother Catherine Ashworth, formerly Voss. Father Thomas Ashworth. She read it twice. 3 times. Catherine Ashworth, formerly Voss. The same woman. Margaret's mother and Eleanor's mother were the same woman. She sat in the cold vestry with the register open in her hands and felt the world do something she had no word for, not tilt, not shift, something quieter than that. Something more like the moment when you have been looking at a shape in the dark and suddenly the light changes and you see it was never the shape you thought at all. Margaret was her sister. Half-sister to be precise, different fathers, the same mother. Catherine had given Margaret up before she married Thomas Ashworth. She had never told anyone. She had never told Eleanor. She had died with it folded up inside her, and she had pressed a medallion into Eleanor's hand and said, "Don't ask," and Eleanor had spent 17 years obeying. She sat in the vestry until the vicar came to close up for the evening and asked, gently, whether she was quite all right. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Thank you. I found what I was looking for." She wasn't sure whether that was true. She had found an answer. But answers had a way, she was discovering, of being mostly made of new questions. She walked back to the estate in the early dark, the frost crunching under her feet, thinking about Lily. Lily, who had pressed her face into Eleanor's coat and said, "You smell like Mama." Who had tied the Duchess's medallion around a cloth rabbit's neck to keep it close. Who had lost her mother at 3 years old and carried that loss around with her like something she hadn't been told how to put down. Lily was her niece. The word arrived with a weight she hadn't anticipated. She stopped walking for a moment, on the dark road with the frost glittering around her and the lights of the estate visible in the distance, and she let herself feel the full strange enormity of it. She had come to this house as a stranger. She was not a stranger. She had never been a stranger. She had been connected to this place, to this child, to the woman in the portrait, by blood, by the particular invisible thread of it that had been cut before she was old enough to know it existed, and had been pulling at her ever since in ways she had never been able to name. She began walking again. She needed to think. She needed to be careful. And she needed, before she decided what to do with what she knew, to understand one more thing. Lady Blackwell had said, "I know who you are," which meant she had known about Margaret and Eleanor's mother, had known they were sisters, had known Eleanor's presence in this house was not coincidence but something that looked, from the right angle, very much like consequence. And she had tried to send Eleanor away. Leave. While it is still simple. Why? What did Lady Blackwell stand to lose from Eleanor knowing the truth? Eleanor walked through the estate gates and felt the answer begin to take shape before she was entirely ready for it. She went to the library that night, not for the letters, not yet. She was not ready for the letters yet, and besides she was not certain they were still there. She went because it was the one room in the house where she had seen the Duke in an unguarded moment, and she found herself, without having decided to, wanting to be somewhere that felt less like a performance. He was there. Standing at the far window with a glass of brandy, he didn't appear to be drinking, looking out at the dark, and he turned when she came in with the expression of a man who has been thinking difficult thoughts and is almost relieved to be interrupted. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were here." Don't go," he said it quickly. Then more measured, "Please. I find I would rather have company." Eleanor came in and sat in one of the chairs by the cold fireplace, because standing felt like it assumed too much, and looked at him, and decided that the only way through this was directly. "Your Grace," she said, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, put the glass down, and gave her his full attention. "I went to the parish records," she said. "I was looking for Margaret's birth record. I found it. And mine." He was very still. "Our mothers were the same woman," Eleanor said. "Margaret and I were half-sisters." The silence that followed was the longest Eleanor had ever sat inside. The fire had burned down to embers, the room was cold, and the Duke stood very still with his eyes on her face, processing it, not the shock of it, or not only that, but the implications spreading out from the central fact like cracks from a stone dropped in ice. "Margaret never knew," he said finally. "It was not a question." "I don't believe so." "I didn't know," Eleanor paused. "But Lady Blackwell does." Something shifted in his face, hard and quick. "How do you know that?" "She told me she knew who I was." "She told me to leave." Eleanor kept her voice steady. "I think she has known for some time. I think she may have known before I arrived. And I think there is something she has been protecting, something that my knowing the truth about Margaret would threaten." He moved away from the window, slowly. The way a man moves when he is thinking and walking helps him think. He went to the fireplace, stood with his hands on the mantelpiece, looked down at the dying embers. "The carriage accident," he said. "Yes, you think it wasn't an accident. I think you think it wasn't an accident," Eleanor said quietly. "And I think someone made sure you didn't look too closely." He stood at the fireplace for a long time. Eleanor waited. Outside, the wind had picked up, pressing against the windows with a sound like someone leaning in to listen. "There was a man," he said finally. "A solicitor. He came 3 days after Margaret died. He had papers, estate papers, guardianship provisions. He said Margaret had arranged them privately before her death without telling me." His jaw tightened. "The provisions gave my mother considerable authority over Lily's care and upbringing in the event of my prolonged absence or incapacitation." Eleanor looked at him. "Did you sign them?" "I was not in a state to read them carefully." A pause, and in it Eleanor heard the shape of a grief so large it had made a man careless with his own life. "I signed them. And your mother," Eleanor said slowly. "She was there. When the solicitor came," he turned to look at her. She arranged it, Elinor said. It was not a question. He said nothing, but the silence was its own answer. Your Grace, Elinor said, I think your mother knows more about Margaret's death than she has told you. I don't think she caused it, I don't believe that. But I think she knows what did. And I think she has been protecting someone. She paused. And I think that someone is why she wants me gone. He looked at her for a long moment. In the dim light of the dying fire, his face was very controlled, and underneath the control something was moving. Old grief, old anger, the particular exhaustion of a man who has been suspicious of something for a long time and has never been able to prove it. What do you want to do? He said. Elinor thought of Lily, of the atlas on the floor, of you know how, stated as simple fact by a child who had observed something true. I want to know what happened to my sister, she said. And then I want Lily to be safe. Everything else comes after that. He looked at her, and something in his face, not quite softening, something more like recognition, the particular look of someone who has just found, unexpectedly, that they are not alone in a place they thought they were the only person standing. All right, he said quietly. He said it the way people say things when they have made a decision, not loudly, not with ceremony, just with the flat finality of a door closing on one room and opening on another. All right. Then we find out together. Elinor was almost at the door when she remembered. She turned back, reached into the pocket of her dress and took out the medallion. She crossed the room and held it out to him. He looked at it, and his face changed completely. All the careful management of it gone, just for a moment, replaced by something raw and unguarded and very old. He reached out and took it, turned it over, ran his thumb across the bird in flight. Where did you get this? His voice was not entirely steady. My mother gave it to me, Elinor said. The week before she died. She told me not to ask where it came from. He looked up at her. Margaret wore one like this every day, he said. It was the only thing she brought from her life before. She never told me where it came from either. He paused. I assumed it was sentimental. Something from her childhood. It was, Elinor said. I think it was from before they were separated. Before our mother gave Margaret away and kept me. A pair. One each. He looked at the medallion for a long time. Then, very carefully, he placed it back in her hand and closed her fingers around it. Keep it, he said. It's yours. Elinor closed her hand around the warm metal and felt, for the first time in this house, that she was not standing on uncertain ground. She was standing exactly where she was supposed to be. She just hadn't known it until now. She was 3 steps from her room when she found the note slipped under the door, a single folded sheet of paper, no envelope, no name. Inside, 4 words in a hand she didn't recognize, angular, pressed hard into the paper, the writing of someone in a hurry or in anger or in both. Leave, or the child will suffer for your curiosity. Elinor stood in the doorway and read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it in her pocket beside the medallion, and went inside. Her hands were shaking slightly. She sat on the bed and let them shake for a moment, because she had learned that pretending you were not frightened when you were only made the fear find other ways out. Then she steadied herself and breathed. Whoever had written this note had made one significant miscalculation. They had assumed that threatening Lily would make Elinor retreat. They had not considered that threatening Lily would make Elinor entirely immovable. She put her hand over the pocket where the note sat beside the medallion. Or the child will suffer. No, Elinor thought, with a clarity that surprised her by its coldness. She won't. Elinor brought the note to the Duke the next morning. She had considered waiting. She had lain awake turning the question over, whether to tell him now, whether to investigate quietly first, whether there was any version of this where she handled it alone and kept him at a safe distance from whatever was gathering around the edges of this house like weather. She had dismissed all of it before dawn. This was not something she could carry alone. Not anymore. And whatever she thought about involving him, whatever complicated, unexamined feeling she had about standing in front of James Ashford and admitting that someone in his household had threatened a 5-year-old child, it mattered less than Lily's safety. Everything mattered less than that. She found him in the study before breakfast, already at his desk, already working, with the particular quality of a man who had not slept and was disguising it through industry. He looked up when she came in, and something in her face must have told him immediately, because he was on his feet before she reached the desk. She put the note on the surface between them without speaking. He read it once quickly, then again more slowly. The expression that moved across his face was not one she had seen from him before, not the controlled grief she had grown accustomed to, nor the guarded attention he usually wore like a second coat, but something colder than either of those things, and quieter and considerably more dangerous. He looked up. "When did you find this? Last night." "Under my door. You should have come to me immediately. It was past midnight," Alina said. "And I needed to think." He held her gaze for a moment, then, to his credit, let it go. "Do you know who wrote it?" "No." "But the hand is deliberate, someone pressing hard, writing quickly." "Someone who was frightened or angry," she paused. "Or both." He looked at the note again, turned it over, looked at the blank back, put it down. "I want you to take Lily to the east sitting room after breakfast," he said. "Stay with her there. Lock the door if you feel you should." He moved toward the door. "I'm going to speak to my mother. Your Grace," he stopped. She said it carefully. "Whatever she tells you, whatever she says to explain this, I need you to hear it fully before you decide what to do. Not just the part that's easiest." He turned to look at her. "I am aware," he said quietly, "that I have made the mistake of hearing only the easiest part before. I don't intend to make it again." He left. Alina stood in the empty study and listened to his footsteps down the corridor, and thought that of all the things she had not expected when she arrived at Ashford Park with her worn leather bag and her 40 pounds a year, this ranked among the most significant: the discovery that James Ashford, Duke of Ashford, was a man who could be trusted to walk toward the difficult thing rather than away from it. She hadn't known that about him until now. She found it mattered more than she would have predicted. She took Lily to the east sitting room as he had asked. Lily accepted this with the adaptability of a child who had learned that adults sometimes did inexplicable things, and the wisest response was to extract whatever entertainment value was available from the situation. The east sitting room had a window seat, and the window looked over the kitchen garden, and there was apparently a cat, an enormous marmalade creature of advanced years and magnificent indifference, who sat on the garden wall most mornings. "His name is Copernicus," Lily said, pressed against the glass. "Mrs. Howell says he doesn't belong to anyone." "But I think he belongs to himself. That seems right for a cat," Alina said. "I've been leaving him bits of kipper on the wall." A pause. "Papa doesn't know. I won't tell him." Lily turned to look at her with an expression of frank assessment. "You're very good at not telling people things," she said. "For someone who seems like they would always tell the truth." Alina looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "You look honest," Lily said, with the directness of a child who had not yet learned to soften observations. "Like it would be hard work for you to lie. But you keep secrets. So you must have decided the secrets are worth the work." Alina was quiet for a moment. "You are remarkably perceptive for 5 years old," she said. "I'm nearly 6, Lily said, and turned back to the window. The Duke found them there 2 hours later. Alina heard him coming, his particular footstep, which she had learned to recognize in the way you learn to recognize things you heard more often than you intended. He looked at Lily first, a quick thorough look, reassuring himself, and then at Alina. "Lily," he said. "Mrs. Howell has gingerbread in the kitchen. She said you might like some." Lily weighed the gingerbread against the cat against whatever else might be happening, in the way that children performed rapid calculations that adults underestimated. "Is Copernicus still on the wall?" "I have no idea who Copernicus is," her father said, but Mrs. Howell specifically mentioned gingerbread. Lily unfolded herself from the window seat. At the door she paused and looked between them both with an expression that suggested she was not entirely convinced by any of this. Then she went. The Duke closed the door. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. "This will take a moment," she sat. He did not. He stood by the window in the same posture as the night before in the library, hands not quite at rest, weight forward, as though braced for something. She waited. "My mother," he began, and then stopped and began again. "My mother has known since before Margaret died that Margaret was not who she appeared to be." Alina kept very still. "Margaret was born illegitimate. Her mother, your mother, I should say, gave her up as an infant. She was taken in by a family called Voss, who had means but no particular standing. She was raised as their ward." He paused. "When she was 17, my mother arranged the match. She had selected Margaret specifically. Her bloodline on the maternal side was impeccable, even if the circumstances of her birth were not. My mother knew. She had made it her business to know. She did not tell me. She told me Margaret was simply from a modest family. She saw no reason I needed the particulars, and Margaret herself," Alina said carefully. "The Voss family told her nothing. She believed she was their ward, orphaned young. She never knew about your mother. She never knew about you." His jaw tightened. "She died not knowing she had a sister." Alina absorbed this, felt the particular grief of it, not sharp but deep, the grief of a thing that could not be unmade. "And Lady Blackwell," she said. "When I arrived, she recognized the resemblance immediately. She also knew, through the solicitor, through channels I was apparently the only person not privy to, that your mother had a second daughter. She had always known there was another child. She chose not to look for her because there was no reason to." He looked at Alina directly. "Until you appeared in her son's entrance hall, and she panicked. She is not a woman who panics," he said. "But she reassessed. She decided your presence was dangerous. That if you discovered the connection, it would raise questions about Margaret's death. Questions she had ensured stayed buried." Alina felt something tighten in her chest. "What does she know about the accident?" He was quiet for a moment that felt very long. "The carriage that day," he said. "The coachman." She had dismissed the man the week before, for reasons she described as unsatisfactory performance. She arranged a replacement at very short notice. He stopped. "The replacement had worked for a man named Hargrove, a business associate of my father's, with whom I had a significant financial dispute at the time of Margaret's death. A dispute that would have been resolved very differently had I been preoccupied with grief. The room was very quiet. She didn't arrange it," Alina said slowly. "But she knew the man. And when it happened, she understood what it meant. And she chose to protect me from knowing," he said. "That is how she has framed it, that she chose to protect me from knowledge that would have destroyed me." His voice was very even, very controlled, the control doing considerable work. "She may even believe that. She is a woman, entirely capable of believing the version of a story that reflects best on her intentions. but she signed papers that gave herself authority over Lily, Alina said. 3 days after Margaret died, while you were unable to read them carefully. That was not protection. That was advantage, he said. Flatly. Yes, they looked at each other. She is not a monster, he said after a moment. I want to be precise about this. She is a woman who made a series of decisions, each one defensible in the moment, that accumulated into something she could no longer see clearly. She told herself she was protecting me. She told herself she was ensuring Lily's upbringing was correct. She told herself you leaving was the simplest solution to a complicated problem. He paused. She has spent so long deciding what other people need to know that she has lost the ability to imagine they might be capable of surviving the truth. And the note, Alina said. Under my door, he pressed his lips together. She denies it. Do you believe her? I believe she is capable of it. Whether she did it personally or arranged it, I cannot prove either. He looked at her steadily. But it doesn't matter. It changes nothing about what happens next. And what happens next, Alina said. He moved away from the window and stood in the center of the room, not pacing, not performing, simply standing with the stillness of a man who had made a decision and was at peace with it in the way that difficult, irreversible decisions sometimes brought peace. My mother will leave Ashford Park, he said. Today. She will return to London, and from London to Wiltshire if she prefers. The papers she had me sign are being reviewed by my own solicitor, not hers, and I am confident they can be voided. A pause. She will not be removed from Lily's life. She is her grandmother, and I am not. I refuse to be the kind of man who punishes a child by removing her family. But she will not have authority here. Not over Lily. Not over this house. And not over you. Alina looked at him. Over me. You are Margaret's sister, he said simply. You are Lily's family. And I will not allow anyone to threaten you or use Lily against you or make you feel that your place here is conditional. He held her gaze. You have as much right to be in this house as anyone. More than most, I would say. Alina found, to her own considerable surprise, that her eyes had filled. She did not cry. She blinked once, breathed, and held herself together with the particular determination of someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time and was not going to stop now simply because someone had said something kind. She was my sister, Alina said, her voice not entirely steady. I never knew her. I never had the chance to. She stopped, started again. She died not knowing. And I arrived here not knowing. And we had so little time, even in the same house, even without knowing. Lily felt it, even without understanding it. She felt the connection. She stopped again. I know, he said quietly. It's not enough, she said. It will never be enough. No, he agreed. It won't. He said it without trying to soften it or redirect it or suggest that in time she might feel differently. He simply agreed, and the honesty of it was, unexpectedly, more comforting than any reassurance would have been. Alina straightened, breathed again, steadied herself. Thank you, she said. For confronting her. For believing me. You brought me evidence, he said. And even before the evidence, he paused. Something moved across his face. You were honest with me when you had very little reason to be, and some reason not to be. That is not something I take lightly. They stood in the quiet of the east sitting room, with the winter light coming through the window where Lily had pressed her face against the glass to watch the cat, and something shifted between them, not dramatically, not with declaration, but in the way that things shift when two people have been through something difficult together and come out the other side and find themselves standing closer than when they started. Alina felt it. She suspected, from the way he did not quite look away, that he did too. Neither of them said anything about it. Lady Blackwell left that afternoon. Eleanor did not witness the conversation between mother and son, did not ask about it afterward, and he did not offer. Some things were not hers to know, and she understood the boundaries of that without being told. She heard the carriage in the drive at 3 o'clock. She was in the schoolroom with Lily, who was drawing Copernicus from memory with great ambition and limited technical success. Eleanor kept her eyes on the paper in front of her. Lily looked up at the sound of the carriage. "Grandmother is leaving," she said. "Yes, she came to see me this morning." Lily looked back at her drawing and added a tale that was perhaps slightly too long. "She said she was sorry. She cried a little bit." A pause. "I've never seen her cry before." Eleanor said nothing. "I told her it was all right," Lily said. "Even though I didn't fully understand what she was sorry about." She looked up. "Is it all right when someone is sorry for something you don't know about?" Eleanor thought about this carefully, because Lily deserved a careful answer. "I think," she said, "that sometimes people carry things for a long time. Things they did or didn't do or did wrong. And sometimes they can only be sorry in the direction of the person nearest to them, even if that person isn't exactly the one they need to be sorry to." Lily considered this. "Like when I broke Papa's pen and I apologized to you because he wasn't there." "Something like that," Eleanor said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied. "I hope she feels better," she said, and returned to Copernicus's tale. Eleanor looked at the child for a moment, at the serious, earnest, extraordinary small person sitting across the table from her. Then she looked out the window at the drive below, where the carriage was pulling away through the frost-edged gates, and she allowed herself one moment, just one, of feeling the full weight of everything that had happened in this house, since she arrived with her worn leather bag and her 40 pounds a year and her unknowing. Then she came back. "That tale," she said, "is magnificent." Lily looked at it with satisfaction. "I know," she said. "He deserves it." That evening, for the first time since Eleanor had come to Ashford Park, the Duke dined with the household. Not formally, not in the dining room with the long table and the silver, but in the smaller room, the one Mrs. Howell called the family room, without appearing to notice the weight of the word. A fire, 3 places set, Lily between them, eating soup with the concentrated application of someone who had been told twice not to slosh, and was taking it seriously. It was, Eleanor thought, the most ordinary thing that had happened in this house since she arrived. It was also, somehow, the most significant. After Lily was in bed, Eleanor sat alone by the fire for a while, tired with the deep particular tiredness that came not from physical effort, but from the sustained work of feeling things and thinking things and holding things together across several days of considerable weight. She should sleep. She knew this. Instead, she sat, looked at the fire, and thought about Margaret. She thought about her sister growing up in a stranger's house, believing herself an orphan, carrying a medallion she didn't understand the origin of. She thought about her arriving at Ashford Park as a young woman, becoming a duchess, laughing when her husband pulled the pins from her hair. She thought about a carriage on a wet road, a replacement coachman, an ordinary morning that wasn't ordinary at all. She thought about Lily, who had lost her before she was old enough to hold the memory clearly. "I am sorry I didn't know you," she thought. "I am sorry no one let us know each other. I am sorry you carried everything alone when you didn't have to." The fire crackled. The house settled around her. "But I'm here now. I found my way here without knowing I was looking. And I'm not leaving. Not this time." She reached up and touched the medallion at her throat. She had taken to wearing it in the last few days, instead of keeping it in the pouch. The metal was warm from her skin. She held it there for a moment. Then she went to bed, and for the first time since arriving at Ashford Park, she slept without dreaming. The gossip arrived before the frost had time to thaw. Elinor had known it would. She was not naive about the way information moved through the particular closed world of English country society, faster than correspondence, more reliable than newspapers, and considerably less kind than either. Lady Blackwell had left Ashford Park under circumstances that no one had officially explained, and in the absence of explanation, explanation would be manufactured. It took 11 days. Mrs. Howell told her because Mrs. Howell was the kind of woman who believed that people deserved to know what was being said about them, so they could decide what to do with it. She came to the schoolroom on a Tuesday morning while Lily was occupied with arithmetic and said, quietly and without preamble, that there was talk in the village. What kind of talk? Elinor said. Mrs. Howell looked at her steadily. The kind that always attaches itself to a woman in a house where there is a widowed man. Elinor kept her expression even. I see. His Grace has been seen in the village twice this week, Mrs. Howell said. Both times he stopped to speak with people who might be described as the originators of the current conversation. He was, she paused, choosing carefully, direct with them. That will make it worse, Elinor said. Yes, Mrs. Howell agreed. It usually does. Elinor noticed it when she went to the village herself 3 days later. Nothing overt. English country society did not do overt as a rule, but subtler than that. The way a conversation paused when she entered the shop. The way Mrs. Cartwright, the vicar's wife, smiled at her with the particular warmth of a woman performing warmth rather than feeling it. The way two women on the high street watched her pass and then bent toward each other immediately afterward. Elinor bought what she needed and walked back to the estate and told herself it did not matter. It did matter. She knew it did not for her own sake, or not primarily, but because it was attaching itself to his name, to Lily's, to a household that had already withstood considerable damage and needed now to be allowed to simply be still. She thought about this through the afternoon lesson, and through dinner, and through the hour she spent reading by the fire afterward, and by the time she arrived at her decision, she was very tired and very clear. She told him the next morning. He was in the library. She went there first now, when she needed to find him, because it was where he most often was in the early hours. He looked up when she came in, and there was something in his face that suggested he already knew what she was going to say. Or some part of it. She sat across from him, folded her hands and said it plainly, because plainly was the only way she knew how to say difficult things. The talk in the village is damaging your name, she said. And it will damage Lily's if it continues. I think the only way to stop it is for me to leave. He was very still. I have thought about this carefully, she said. I am not saying it because I want to leave. I am saying it because I think it is the right thing, and I think you know it is the right thing, and I think we are both capable of acknowledging that even when it is uncomfortable. She paused. Margaret's connection to me doesn't need to become public. The legal matter of Lily's guardianship is settled. She is safe. She is well. She doesn't need me here for those things. She needs you here, he said quietly. Full stop. Your Grace, James, he said. She stopped. He said it again, quieter. James. We are past formality, I think, after everything. He looked at her. You were going to argue with me. I was, Elinor said. Go ahead. Your reputation matters more than my presence in this house. I will not be the reason people look at Lily sideways when she grows up. I will not be the reason her name carries gossip instead of dignity. She kept her voice level with some effort. I love that child. Which is precisely why I can do this. Something moved across his face at the word love. He did not remark on it. And what would you do? He said. Where would you go? London, perhaps. There are other positions. Other positions, he repeated, in a tone that made clear what he thought of that. Yes. He stood, moved to the window, and stood there with his back to her for a moment. She could see the tension across his shoulders, the effort of a man holding something in that wanted very much to come out. I spent 2 years, he said, without turning around, making decisions based on what other people told me I should do. What would be easier? What would be better for everyone concerned? I signed papers I should have read. I stopped asking questions I should have asked. I persuaded myself that other people understood the situation more clearly than I did, and that deference was wisdom. He paused. It was not wisdom. It was fear dressed as reasonableness. He turned around. I am not going to manage this situation by sending you away, he said. I am not going to allow other people's conclusions, drawn from ignorance and idle speculation, to determine what happens in my house or to the people in it. His voice was even, but underneath the evenness, there was something Alina recognized as the particular quiet of a man who had reached the end of a very long patience. If there is talk, we will manage the talk. There are ways to do that which do not involve you disappearing to London to take another position. What ways? Alina said. He looked at her. She looked back. And in the silence between the question and the answer, something that had been building for weeks, quietly, carefully, refusing to be hurried, became suddenly, plainly visible to both of them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Alina said, very carefully, "You should not make decisions of that kind on my behalf. Not out of gratitude or obligation, or do you think that is what this is?" he said. She held his gaze. I don't know what it is. I don't think either of us knows what it is. And that is precisely why I think the careful thing. I have been doing the careful thing for 2 years, he said. I am aware of its limitations. James, his name in her mouth felt strange and right in equal measure. I am not going because I want to. I am going because I think you need time without me in this house, complicating things, to understand what you actually feel rather than what the circumstances have produced. We have been through something extraordinary together. That creates feelings. I understand that. But feelings that come from extraordinary circumstances deserve to be tested against ordinary ones before anyone acts on them. He was quiet for a long time. You are, he said finally, a remarkably rational person. I try to be. It is somewhat inconvenient. Despite everything, something almost like a smile moved across her face. Yes. I know. He looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded, once, reluctant, the nod of a man accepting an argument he disagreed with because he could not find the flaw in it. All right, he said. But I want it understood that this is temporary. That will depend, Alina said carefully, on a number of things. It will depend, he said, on one thing. She did not ask him what it was. She thought she knew. She told Lily that afternoon. She had been dreading it more than anything else, more than the village, more than the gossip, more than the conversation with the Duke. Lily was 5 years old, nearly 6, and she had already lost one person she loved without warning or preparation, and Alina had promised herself, when she first understood what Lily was to her, that she would not be another disappearance in this child's life. She could not keep that promise entirely, but she could keep it as well as possible. She sat on the floor of the schoolroom, Lily's preferred location for serious conversations. Alina had concluded, and she told her simply and honestly that she was going to be away for a little while, and that it was not because she wanted to leave, and that she would be back. Lily listened with her hands in her lap and her serious eyes on Alina's face. When Alina finished, Lily was quiet for a moment. "How long?" she said. "I don't know exactly." "Not forever. That's what people say when it might be forever," Lily said. Not accusatory. Just observational. The way she said most things. "I know," Alina said. "And I understand why you would think that. But I am not your mama, Lily. I am someone different, in a different situation, and I am telling you something different. I am telling you that I will come back because I am telling you the truth, and the truth is that there is nowhere else I want to be." Lily looked at her for a long moment. "You smell like her," she said softly. "You always have." "I know," Alina said, her voice not entirely steady. "That's because we were connected, your mama and I, in a way I've only recently understood. Which means I am connected to you too. And that doesn't stop because I go to London for a little while." Lily absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. Then she stood up, crossed the small distance between them, and sat down in Alina's lap with the complete confidence of a child who had decided this was where she was going to be and was not interested in alternative proposals. Alina put her arms around her and held her, pressing her face into the dark curly hair that smelled of soap and cold air, and something she now understood was simply the particular scent of this child, of this family, of blood recognizing blood. "Promise," Lily said into her shoulder. "Promise," Alina said. She held her for a long time. She left on a Thursday morning. The carriage came at 9. Alina had one bag, the same worn leather bag she had arrived with, which felt appropriate. She had said goodbye to Mrs. Howell the night before, because she had known that doing it in the morning with the carriage waiting would be more than she could manage with any dignity, and Mrs. Howell had gripped her hand and said, very quietly, "Don't stay away long," with the air of someone who knew more than she was saying and felt no need to elaborate. The Duke was in the drive. He had not said he would be. She had not asked. But he was there, standing at the foot of the steps in the cold morning air without a coat, because he was that kind of man, the kind who stood in the cold without a coat rather than miss the moment. Alina came down the steps with her bag and stopped in front of him. They looked at each other. There was so much that could have been said. She was aware of all of it, the weight of it, the density of everything that had accumulated between them over weeks of proximity and crisis and ordinary moments, and the slow, inexorable process of two people actually seeing each other. All of it was there, present, real. Neither of them said any of it. "The solicitor has your London address," he said. "For the estate matters, yes, and you have Mrs. Howell's address. If you need anything, yes." A pause. "Alina," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. Just her name simply, without preface or occasion. She looked at him. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. It was all in the way he said it, the whole of what he hadn't said, and what she hadn't said, compressed into 2 syllables and left there between them like something they were both agreeing to keep safe until they could return to it. "Goodbye, James," she said. She got in the carriage. She did not look back as it pulled away. She had learned, in 26 years, that looking back made things harder without making them better. She looked forward at the frost-gray road ahead, at the flat fields spreading out on either side, at the morning light coming thin and pale through the carriage window. She did not cry. She counted her breaths instead. 1, 2, 3. She had gotten to 19 when the carriage slowed unexpectedly. She leaned to the window. The driver had stopped, not because of the road was clear, and was holding something up that had been handed to him by one of the estate boys, who was standing at the verge breathing hard as though he'd run. A letter. Sealed. Her name on the outside, in handwriting she didn't recognize. She took it, broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in small formal script. At the top, a name she recognized, the solicitor's firm in London, the firm that had handled Margaret's estate. And beneath the firm's name, words that she read twice, very slowly, because she was not certain she understood them the first time. Dear Miss Ashworth, we write on behalf of the estate of Margaret Elaine Ashford, Duchess of Ashford, deceased. It has come to our attention, through recent inquiries, that you are the natural sister of the deceased. As such, we are obliged to inform you that the final testament of the Duchess, prepared privately in October 1857, and deposited with this firm under instruction of strictest confidentiality, contains provisions made in your name. We request your attendance at your earliest convenience to discuss the particulars. Eleanor lowered the letter. She sat in the moving carriage with the letter in her lap, and the frost going past outside, and the sound of the wheels on the road steady beneath her. Margaret had known. Not about Eleanor specifically, she couldn't have known. But she had known something. She had prepared for something. She had sat down privately, without telling her husband, and she had written a will that contained a name she had never spoken aloud. Your name, Eleanor thought. Margaret had known she had a sister. And she had left her something. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, put it in her coat pocket beside the medallion, sat back in the carriage, and looked at the road ahead. Beneath the grief, beneath the wonder of it, beneath the complicated and still unnamed thing she was carrying in her chest that had everything to do with a man standing coatless in a cold drive, something settled. Something that felt, quietly and without ceremony, like being found. The solicitor's office was on a narrow street in Holborn. 3 flights of stairs, a waiting room that smelled of coal smoke and old paper, a clerk who took her name with the careful neutrality of someone trained never to react to anything. Eleanor sat in the waiting room with her coat still on and the letter in her pocket, and looked at the wall and thought about Margaret sitting down at a desk somewhere in Ashford Park, and writing a name she had never spoken aloud. Her sister's name, given to her by a mother she had never known, who had pressed a medallion into another daughter's hand and said, "Don't ask." 2 women carrying pieces of the same secret, in different directions, never finding each other. Eleanor looked at the wall and felt the grief of it settle into something she recognized she would carry for a long time, not sharp, not disabling, simply present, woven into the fabric of things, part of the texture of every ordinary day from this one forward. She could live with that. She had learned to live with things. The clerk reappeared. "Mr. Hatch will see you now, Mr." Hatch was elderly, precise, and had the manner of a man who had spent 40 years delivering news of varying degrees of consequence, and had learned to deliver all of it with the same measured calm. He confirmed what the letter had said. Margaret's will, prepared in October of 1857, 2 months before her death, deposited privately and sealed, with instructions that it be opened only upon proof of the named beneficiary's identity and existence. "She knew I existed," Eleanor said. "She knew, Mr." Hatch said carefully, that she had a sister. "She did not know your name, your location, or whether you were living. She had discovered the fact of your existence approximately 6 months before her death, through her own private inquiries into her origins." He paused. "She came to this office in September of that year. She was composed, in the way of someone who has recently received a significant shock and chosen to manage it through practical action." Eleanor looked at him. "She never tried to find me. She intended to," he said. "She told me so directly." She said she needed time to consider how to proceed, how to tell her husband, how to approach you, what the right circumstances would be. She was not a woman who acted without consideration. A pause. She ran out of time. The room was very quiet. Alina looked at the desk, at her hands, at the window behind Mr. Hatch where the gray London sky sat flat and indifferent above the rooftops. She had known. She had been preparing. She had been sitting with the knowledge of a sister she had never met, turning it over, waiting for the right moment. And the right moment had never come because an ordinary morning had arrived first and taken everything with it. Alina breathed. In. Out. What did she leave? She said. It was not a fortune. Alina had not expected a fortune. It was the medallion, formally bequeathed, which made Alina press her lips together hard for a moment, and a sum of money that was modest but meaningful, enough to live on carefully for several years, enough to not need a position if she chose not to take one. And a letter. Mr. Hatch handed it across the desk. The seal was already broken. She had given her permission for it to be opened in her presence. Her name was on the outside in handwriting she recognized now, from the bundle in the library at Ashford Park. For my sister, whoever and wherever she is. Alina held it in both hands for a moment. Then she read it. She would not, afterward, repeat its contents to anyone. Not in full. It was hers, the first thing that had ever been entirely, specifically, deliberately hers, and she kept it that way. But the shape of it was this: a woman writing to a stranger she loved without having met her, saying the things that needed saying across the distance of an uncrossable gap. Saying I am sorry we didn't have time. Saying I hope you are well and loved and not too lonely. Saying that if you have found your way to Lily, please stay. She needs someone who comes from the same place she comes from, even if neither of you knew it. Please stay, Margaret had written. For her, if not for yourself. And then at the bottom, in slightly different ink as though added later, I think you will be brave enough to. I don't know you, but I think I know that much. Alina sat in the solicitor's office on a narrow street in Holborn and read her dead sister's letter and did not cry, because she had made herself a promise about crying in public, and she intended to keep it. But it was, she would admit later, a very near thing. She found a room in a boarding house in Bloomsbury, clean, quiet, a reasonable cost. The landlady was a brisk Scottish woman named Mrs. Ferguson, who asked no unnecessary questions, provided excellent porridge, and had a cat, small and gray and deeply suspicious of everyone, who sat on the landing and regarded Alina with the particular disdain of a creature who had seen many temporary occupants and expected to outlast this one too. Alina named him Ptolemy in her head in Lily's honor. She settled into a routine. She walked in the mornings, read in the afternoons, and wrote letters to Mrs. Howell, careful and warm, and to her friend in Bath, long overdue and somewhat edited for content. She did not write to the Duke. She had decided, clearly and deliberately, that writing to him was something she was not going to do, because she had told him he needed time to understand what he felt without her in the house, and she was not going to undermine that by putting herself back in his mind the moment she arrived in London. This was the rational thing. She thought about him anyway, of course, with a frequency she found mildly inconvenient and entirely unsurprising. She thought about the way he had stood in the corridor at midnight, talking about Admiral the dog, making a feverish child laugh. She thought about his hands closing over her fingers when he gave back the medallion. She thought about the carriage drive and the cold morning, and Alina said simply, as though her name were enough to contain everything he wasn't saying. She thought about these things, and then she went for walks and looked at the gray London sky and told herself to be patient. Patience had never come easily to her. She was working on it. 3 days passed. Then 5. On the 7th day, she received a letter from Mrs. Howell, which she opened immediately and read twice. It contained news of the household, of Copernicus, of a new recipe Mrs. Howell had attempted for gingerbread and judged only a partial success. It contained, at the end, a careful and elaborately casual sentence about how Lily had cried for the first 2 nights and then stopped, but had taken to carrying the cloth rabbit with her everywhere, including to the schoolroom, which was currently being presided over by a temporary governess from the village who was Mrs. Howell felt adequate without being inspiring. Elena read adequate without being inspiring and felt something that was partly guilt and partly something else entirely. She put the letter away and did not take it out again. On the 8th day it rained. Elena walked anyway, along the embankment with her coat pulled close, and the river gray and muscular beside her, thinking about the word adequate. Thinking about what she was doing here, in this room, in this city, being what? Patient. Principled. She was being principled, she told herself. She was giving him time and space to understand his own mind without the complication of her presence, which was the right thing to do, and she was doing it, and it was fine. It was not fine. She turned around at Blackfriars Bridge and walked back faster than she had come. On the morning of the 10th day, someone knocked at the door of the boarding house. Elena was upstairs. She heard Mrs. Ferguson's footsteps at the door, a voice she didn't catch. Then Mrs. Ferguson's footsteps on the stairs, unhurried, and a knock at Elena's door. "Visitor for you, Mrs." Ferguson said when Elena opened it. "A gentleman." She said it in the tone of a woman who had strong views about gentlemen calling on single female occupants of her boarding house and was reserving them for later. "I've put him in the front room." Elena went very still. "What does he look like, Mrs.?" Ferguson looked at her. "Tall," she said. "Dark. Looks like he hasn't slept in a few days. Didn't bring a card, which I will say is irregular." A pause. "He's not wearing a hat, which I found somewhat dramatic." Elena gripped the doorframe. "Thank you, Mrs. Ferguson," she said. "I'll go down." He was standing at the window of the front room, not looking out of it, just standing near it, the way he stood when he was thinking. He turned when she came in, and she saw immediately that Mrs. Ferguson had been accurate. He had not slept. He looked like a man who had made a decision, and then spent several days arriving at it, and then driven from Derbyshire to London without stopping for anything except the horses. He looked, she thought, like himself, more than she had seen him look like himself in all the weeks she'd known him, as though something that had been carefully managed for a very long time had simply stopped being managed. "I told you," she said, because she had to say something, "that you needed time." "You told me," he said, "that feelings formed under extraordinary circumstances deserve to be tested against ordinary ones." I took this seriously. He looked at her steadily. "I have had 10 days of ordinary circumstances. I am not finding them particularly illuminating. 10 days is not Elena." He said her name the way he had said it in the drive, with everything compressed into it. "I am not here because of extraordinary circumstances. I am not here because you found Margaret's letter, or because of the medallions, or because we survived several weeks of considerable difficulty together." He paused. "I am here because Lily cried for 2 nights and then stopped crying, which was somehow worse than the crying. I am here because Mrs. Howell wrote me a very short note that said, 'Only for goodness sake, James,' which is the most direct communication I have received in years. And I am here because I have not slept in 3 days, which I am choosing to interpret as data." Elena looked at him. You drove from Derbyshire, she said. I did, without a hat apparently. Something moved across his face. I was in a hurry. James, she said his name carefully. What I said before, about not knowing what you felt, about the circumstances. I know what I feel, he said simply, without drama. I have known for some time. I was simply being careful with it. Because I am aware that I am a man with a complicated household and a grieving daughter and a recently unearthed family scandal, and those are not straightforward things to bring to someone. He paused. I was also aware that you are the most rational person I have ever met and would require a rational accounting of my position before you would consider it seriously. That's, she started. So here is my rational accounting, he said. You came to my house as a stranger, and within 3 days my daughter trusted you more than she had trusted anyone since her mother died. You found out the truth about your own history, and instead of using it for advantage, you used it to protect Lily. You argued with me when I needed arguing with and told me the truth when it was inconvenient, and left when you thought it was right even though I could see it cost you. He held her gaze. You are the most honest person I have encountered in a long time. In a life that has had considerable dishonesty in it, that is not a small thing. Elinor said nothing. She was finding it somewhat difficult to speak. I am not asking you to return to Ashford Park as a governess, he said. I am not asking you to return as Lily's aunt, though you are that, and she knows it now. I told her 2 days ago, and she received the information with the equanimity of someone who had suspected it for some time. A pause. I am asking whether you would consider returning in a different capacity altogether. A permanent one. Elinor looked at him. That is, he said, and for the first time since she had known him he looked something approaching uncertain. If the circumstances are such that he stopped. Collected himself. I am making rather a poor job of this. You're doing fine, Elinor said softly. I had a speech, he said. I prepared it on the road. It was considerably more coherent than this. I believe you. He looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He smiled. A real one, unguarded, the smile of a man who had stopped managing things. It changed his face completely. Will you come home? He said. The word home arrived in her chest and stayed there. She looked at this man, this serious, complicated, careful man who had stood coatless in a cold drive and driven hatless through 3 counties, and was standing in a Scottish landlady's front room looking at her with everything visible on his face, and she thought about what it had cost him to stand here. She thought about 2 years of careful management. She thought about a man who had learned, the hard way, that doing the careful thing had its limits. She thought about Lily with the cloth rabbit. She thought about adequate without being inspiring. She thought about a letter in her coat pocket that said, "Please stay, and I think you will be brave enough." She thought, "I think so too." "Yes," she said. He let out a breath, just one, quiet, barely audible, the breath of a man setting something down that he has been carrying for a considerable distance. "There is one condition," Elinor said. He looked at her wary. "What condition? I would like to ask Lily first. Before anything is decided or announced or formalized. I would like to ask her." Properly. Something moved across his face, the particular expression of a man who had just been shown something that mattered to him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "That," he said quietly, "is not a condition. That is simply the right thing." "Yes," Elinor said. "I know." They arrived at Ashford Park the following afternoon. Elinor had not been gone 2 weeks, but the house looked different to her, or she looked at it differently, which amounted to the same thing. The gray stone, the tall windows, the silence that had once felt like breath being held. It still felt like that. but now she understood what it was waiting for. Mrs. Howell met them at the door. She looked at Alina, then at the Duke, then back at Alina, and her expression said everything she was far too dignified to say aloud. "Lily is in the schoolroom," she said. "Shall I know?" Alina said. "I'll go." Lily was at the desk. She had the atlas open in front of her but was not looking at it. She was looking at the cloth rabbit, which sat propped against the inkwell with the medallion gleaming at its throat. She looked up when Alina came in and went very still. Alina crossed the room and sat down on the floor. After a moment, Lily climbed down from the chair and came to sit across from her, the way they had sat on the first day among the scattered wooden letters, hands in her lap, eyes very serious and very bright. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would." Lily looked at her for a long moment. "Are you staying?" Alina took a breath. "That depends," she said carefully, "on whether you want me to." "Not as your governess," she paused. "As something more permanent than that. As family." Lily considered this with the full weight of her considerable attention. "Because you're my mama's sister," she said. "Yes." "Which makes me your aunt." Alina paused. "But I would like, if you'll allow it, to be something more than that too. If it seems right to you." She held Lily's gaze. "What do you think?" Lily looked at her for a long time. The afternoon light was coming through the schoolroom window, catching the medallion at the rabbit's throat, and Alina could hear the house around them. The settling of it, the breathing of it, the sound of something that had been held too long slowly releasing. "I think," Lily said slowly, "that you smell like Mama. And that when you're not here the schoolroom is too quiet." She paused. "And I think Papa smiles more when you're around." Not his regular smile. His real one. Alina's throat was very tight. "He has a real one," she managed. "I know," Lily said. "I've been waiting for it to come back." She looked at Alina steadily. "I think it came back because of you." The silence between them was very warm. Then Lily reached out and picked up the rabbit and held it out to Alina. "You should have this back," she said. "The medallion." "It's yours, Mrs. Howell said so." "It was your mama's." "It was your mama's first," Lily said, with the absolute certainty of someone stating a thing that is simply true. "She would want you to have it. And Mama would want you to have it too." "I know she would." She pressed the rabbit gently back against her chest and looked up. "Can I keep the rabbit, though?" Alina laughed. "A real one, unexpected, the kind that came from somewhere uncomplicated and warm." "Yes," she said. "Absolutely keep the rabbit." Lily smiled. And then she did what she had done on the very first day, without preamble or permission, with the complete confidence of someone who had already decided. She leaned across and pressed her face into Alina's shoulder. Alina put her arms around her. "All right," Lily said, muffled into Alina's coat. "You can stay." She found the Duke in the corridor outside. He was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, looking at the ceiling, with the expression of a man doing his best not to listen at doors and finding it challenging. He straightened when she came out. "Well," he said. "She said I can stay." He closed his eyes for just a moment. Then opened them. "She also said," Alina added, "that your smile has come back." He looked at her. "Has it? I couldn't say. I haven't seen enough of it to compare. That," he said, "is something we can rectify." He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked back down the corridor together, toward the stairs, toward the sound of the house reopening around them, toward the light at the end of the east wing coming gold and steady through the windows, and Alina felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that she was not walking toward something uncertain. She was walking home. 6 weeks later, on a bright January morning with frost on the garden and a fire in every room, James Ashford, the 6th Duke of Ashford, asked Eleanor Ashworth to marry him. He did it in the library. He had, he admitted, prepared a speech, considerably more coherent than the one in Mrs. Ferguson's front room, which Eleanor told him set a low bar, and he agreed. And then he said the things he had prepared and several things he hadn't, and Eleanor listened to all of it with her hands folded and her expression giving nothing away until he had finished. Then she said yes. He kissed her once, briefly, and then looked at the door with a slightly hunted expression. "She's listening," Eleanor said. "I know," he said. A pause. Then louder toward the door, "Lily." "You may come in." The door opened immediately. Lily appeared, still in her nightgown, with the rabbit under one arm and an expression of magnificent innocence. "I wasn't listening," she said. "Of course not," Eleanor said. "Is it decided?" "It is." Lily looked between them, then crossed the room and sat down between them on the window seat with the proprietorial ease of someone claiming her rightful place, and opened the atlas that had been sitting on the cushion. "Good," she said. "Now, I have questions about Spain." The Duke looked at Eleanor over Lily's head. Eleanor looked back. And the smile, the real one, the one Lily had been waiting for, was there. Steady and warm and no longer carefully managed. Eleanor thought, there it is. There it has always been, waiting. I found my way here without knowing I was looking. And everything I found was already mine. 1 year later, the lavender came up in April. Eleanor had planted it in October, in the beds along the south wall of the garden where the light was best and the soil was dark and yielding. She had not been entirely certain it would take. The Derbyshire winters were not gentle, and lavender was a plant with opinions about where it was willing to grow. But she had planted it anyway, carefully, on a gray afternoon while Lily sat on the garden wall and supervised with the focused authority of someone who had done extensive reading on the subject and was not afraid to share it. It came up in April, first one stem, tentative, then three, then a whole low sprawl of it along the south wall, silver green and determined. Eleanor stood in the garden on the morning she noticed it and did not move for quite some time. The house was different now. Not in its bones, the gray stone was the same, the tall windows, the corridors that went on longer than you expected and turned in directions you hadn't anticipated. But the quality of the air had changed. That suspension was gone, that held-breath quality Eleanor had noticed on the very first evening, the sense of a house waiting for something to change. It had changed. There was noise now, of the ordinary domestic kind that meant a house was being lived in rather than preserved. Lily's footsteps on the stairs, quick and determined. The sound of Mrs. Howell in the kitchen, the particular rhythm of her that Eleanor could identify without looking. James's voice in the study when he was talking to the estate manager, or in the library when he was reading aloud to Lily in the evenings, which had become a fixed point of the day that no one had formally proposed, and everyone simply organized themselves around. Copernicus had moved inside. This had not been formally decided either. He had simply appeared one cold February morning inside the front door, and no one had been willing to make him leave. And now, he occupied the window seat in the east sitting room with the air of someone who had been waiting for the invitation for some time, and was not going to demean himself by appearing grateful. Lily had told him seriously that he was very welcome and that she hoped he found the arrangement satisfactory. He had blinked at her once, which she interpreted as confirmation. Eleanor was the Duchess of Ashford. She had not, in all her 26 years of making herself useful in other people's houses, imagined that particular sentence in connection with herself. She had not imagined a great many things that were now simply true. That she would have a sister she had never met and love her anyway. That she would find a child she had not known existed and recognize her as her own. That she would stand in a library in November and look at a man standing at a window and begin, without knowing it, to fall. She wore the medallion every day. It sat at her throat, warm from her skin, the small silver bird perpetually mid-flight. She had had a jeweler in Derby look at it in February, and he had told her what she had already suspected. It was one of a pair, made to be a matched set, designed to be given together or not at all. One each, she had told James, in the library on the night everything shifted. She had been right. Margaret's medallion lived in Lily's room now. Not around the rabbit's neck. Lily had decided, with considerable solemnity, that it deserved better than that, and had placed it in the small wooden box on her windowsill where she kept her most important things. The smooth pebble from the garden, the drawing of the horse with too many legs, a feather from a bird she had found in the grounds last autumn and spent 3 days identifying with the thoroughness of a natural philosopher. And the medallion, nested in the corner of the box next to the feather. A pair separated for 26 years and now, in their way, reunited. Margaret's portrait was no longer covered. James had taken the dust cover down himself, on a morning in December when the light was good, and had carried it out of the East Wing sitting room and hung it in the main corridor where the family portraits were. He had not made an occasion of it. He had simply done it quietly and told no one in advance. Elinor had found it there one afternoon and stood in front of it for a long time. Margaret looked out from the canvas with the same serene expression, unbothered by the living world. Elinor looked at the eyes, their mother's eyes, she had decided, though she had no portrait to compare, and felt the particular complicated mixture of things she always felt in front of this painting. Grief for what hadn't happened. Gratitude for what had. The strange doubled feeling of loving someone you had never met. She had talked to the portrait once in the early weeks, when she was still finding her way into the shape of this new life. She had stood in the corridor at night with a candle and said the things she hadn't been able to say to anyone else. I didn't know you existed until I was standing in your house. I didn't know I had been looking for you until I found the shape of where you had been. I'm sorry we didn't have time. I'm sorry you ran out of it before I arrived. But I'm here now. And I'm staying. And Lily as well, she is so well, you would not believe how well she is. She knows things about 14 countries and can spell encyclopedia and yesterday. She told the cook that the biscuits needed more butter and was entirely correct. She had paused. Thank you for leaving me that letter. Thank you for knowing somehow to leave it. I think you would have found me eventually. I think you would have been brave enough. I think we both would have been. She had put the candle out and gone to bed and slept well, and had not felt the need to speak to the portrait since. Some things once said were settled. The estate had changed too. James had spent the winter working through it, the papers his mother had arranged, the provisions, the slow, careful unraveling of a situation that had been constructed around him while he was too deep in grief to notice. Elinor had sat with him through some of it, not to advise but because he had asked her to be there, and she had understood that this was not really about the papers. It was about doing, finally, the thing he had not been able to do 2 years ago. Looking at it directly. Not being persuaded that looking away was protection. Lady Blackwell had written twice. The first letter had been formal, brief, directed to James. The second had been addressed to Elinor. She had read it 3 times before deciding what she thought of it. It was not an apology exactly. Lady Blackwell was not, Elinor had concluded, a woman constitutionally capable of apology in its pure form. But it was something adjacent to one, an acknowledgement, a statement careful and precise that she understood she had caused harm in the course of trying to prevent it, and that she was aware this was not a sufficient accounting. She had ended it with this: "Margaret would have liked you. I see now that this is the thing I should have allowed myself to see from the beginning, rather than the thing that frightened me. I am sorry I allowed fear to govern what should have been governed by better things." Elinor had written back, briefly and carefully, leaving a door open without walking through it herself. They were not reconciled. They were not estranged. They were in the early tentative territory of two people who had wronged each other and were deciding, slowly, whether to find their way toward something better. It was, Elinor thought, about as much as could be expected. More than some families managed. On the 1st of May, Elinor planted roses along the east wall. Lily helped. This primarily involved handing Elinor tools at the wrong moment and asking questions at high speed, and at one point discovering a beetle of considerable size, and spending 20 minutes in close scientific observation before it was gently suggested that the roses were waiting. James came out at midday with lunch on a tray, cold meat, bread, cheese, a pot of tea, and sat on the garden wall and watched them work. Elinor looked up and found him looking at her with the real smile. She had stopped being surprised by it, in the best possible way, the way you stopped being surprised by a thing that had become part of the ordinary texture of days. It was simply there, as things that belonged somewhere were simply there once they arrived. She smiled back and turned back to the roses. "Miss Ashe, Mama." Lily said it with the careful deliberateness of someone who had decided to try a new word and wanted to get it right. She had started in February, tentatively, and then with increasing confidence as she discovered that the word fit, that it settled into the shape of things as though it had always been meant to be there. "Can we plant something else along the bottom?" "Something smaller," Elinor thought. "What would you like?" Lily considered with appropriate gravity. "Lavender," she said. "Mrs. Howell says it grows very well here." Elinor looked at the garden, at the south wall where the lavender had come up in April, at Lily's serious bright face turned up toward her, waiting. She thought about a dead woman who had worn lavender. She thought about a child pressing her face into a stranger's coat. She thought about two medallions, separated at birth, finding their way back into the same house through paths no one had planned. "We find each other, eventually," she thought. "Across distance and time, and all the things people do to keep us apart. We find each other." "Yes," she said. "I think lavender is exactly right." That evening, after Lily was in bed, Elinor walked through the house alone. She did this sometimes, not from restlessness but from something she didn't have a precise word for. Gratitude, perhaps. Or simply the need to feel the house around her, to understand by moving through it that it was real, that she was here, that this was not something she would wake from. She went through the corridors slowly, trailing her fingers along the wall. The library, dark and smelling of old paper and the ghost of lavender in the curtains. The east sitting room where Copernicus slept, a warm shape in the window, one eye opening as she passed, and then closing again with the equanimity of a creature that had long since made its peace with its circumstances. She stopped in the corridor in front of Margaret's portrait. The evening light was failing and the painting was in shadow, the features soft and indistinct, but Elinor knew the face by heart now. She could have drawn it herself. "Lily planted lavender today," she said in her head, the way she sometimes still did. She said she'd read that it grows well here. She was right, yours came up in April. James laughed at dinner tonight. Properly. Lily made a remark about Copernicus that I won't repeat in polite company, and he laughed, and it echoed in the dining room in a way that made Mrs. Howell look up from the sideboard with an expression that I thought she might be trying to hide, and then decided she wasn't trying very hard. She looked at the painted face. It's a good house, she thought. You chose a good house. And a good man and a good daughter. I wish you had longer in it. I wish so many things. But I'm here now. I'll look after them. She stood there for another moment, quiet, with the sounds of the house around her. Then she walked on, through the corridor, toward the light at the end of the hall where James was waiting in the library with a fire and 2 chairs, and a book he'd been meaning to read aloud and hadn't gotten to yet. She pushed open the door. He looked up. The real smile. Steady and warm. There you are, he said. Here I am, she said. She sat down in the chair beside his and held out her hand, and he took it. And outside the window the Derbyshire night came in slow and dark and full of stars. She had arrived at Ashford Park a stranger, with a worn leather bag and a medallion she didn't understand, and 26 years of making herself useful in other people's houses. She had not known, standing in that entrance hall on a gray November morning, that it was not other people's house she had walked into. She had not known that the child running toward her across the stone floor was running home. She had not known that the man at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister with white knuckles, was looking at her with that expression because some part of him, some part that was older and quieter and wiser than reason, already knew what the rest of him would take months to understand. She had not known any of it. But she had stayed. She had stayed when it was difficult and left when it was right and come back when it mattered. And she had told the truth when it cost her, and asked the questions that needed asking, and stood in the corridor of a frightening house with a candle in her hand and chosen, every time, to look directly at the thing rather than away from it. And here was what she had found on the other side of all of it. A house that was hers. A child who called her mama with the confidence of someone who had waited for exactly the right word. A man who smiled at her with his real smile and held her hand in the firelight and said there, "You are," as though she were something he had been keeping a place for. And in the garden, along the south wall where the light was best, lavender coming up in April. As it would, she thought, every April from now on. As it would. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If you're still here, we'd truly love to know where you're watching from. Those comments mean more to us than you might think, and we read every single one. This is a space for stories that linger, that unfold slowly, and that stay with you long after they end. If you'd like more stories like this, with deeper emotion and richer detail, consider subscribing and being part of this journey with us.